Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of System Link for Wednesday, the 5th of February 2025. As always, I'm joined, what apparently is by this guy, Pumpkin, every single week. Audio listeners, please enjoy the fact that I just described and held up my giant ginger tabby cat. But, of course, we must acknowledge, most importantly, my co-host, Mike Hazelton, from the Xbox Guide. Mike, how are we doing?
Good. I'm glad you said most importantly, because otherwise I was second to the cat. So
I felt that energy coming through.
Thanks for getting that in.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that was course corrected live on air. So thank you so much for tuning in, Big Manny. Good to see you in chat as always. Folks, if you are listening on our YouTube, Spotify or Podbean version of this podcast, you can check out the show live right here on twitch.tv/BurlyBirdMedia. Please do consider checking it out, jumping into chat. We also have our community questions on Discord. We'll be revisiting our community question last week, which was the highlights from the recent Xbox Developer Direct. We'll be getting those comments read out live on the show right before we hit our deep dive tonight. Our deep dive focus is going to be on Battlefield 6. EA just blowing the doors off this thing. No more just here's a concept art with a logo and a flaming background. They've actually got some specifics for us, enough at least for you and I to do a deep dive and talk about.
Yeah.
So plenty to delve into there. We've got a few smaller headlines to cover tonight. We're going to kick things off with a recent report from EA and Dragon Age. Always, continuing these rumours that continuing to swirl that it underperformed. But also, this is where some sort of shareholder executive comments about it not succeeding due to it lacking a live service angle, which I find, somewhat tenuous.
It's scary, isn't it, when people start talking about live service as being a saviour of certain series. I've obviously heard about Harry Potter.
Yeah. Haven't there been enough high-profile failures in that space for them to realise that it's not perhaps shouldn't be upheld on the pedestal that's being given to that genre?
Well, the problem is with Dragon Age, for that to work as a live service game, you would have to absolutely smash it out of the park for it to succeed in that sector. Whereas otherwise, you make a standard Dragon Age game, and all the Dragon Age fans are basically going to buy it. So you're kind of assured, as long as it's a competent game, which it was, you're kind of assured of a base number of sales. But if you make it live service, you risk pissing those people off. And unless it's really good, you're not going to attract the new people in. So really risky.
And then on top of that, there's the additional context of that studio coming off of Andromeda and Anthem. So the idea of them then following both of those games up with Anthem, I think had live service elements in it, didn't pan out entirely, and was obviously binned off. You then fast forward to Dragon Age, which is a title that has like you said, an existing fan base that's going to follow you no matter what. Why would you choose to alienate them? If for the sake of chasing engagement or secondary spending that live service games encourage, it just seems like it would just be, well, it would have been a huge misstep, I think, for that game. And this ties in with a previous conversation we've had before in relation to Square Enix, where you look at it and go, what kind of expectations are these publishers setting on these titles? Like, when they say something underperforms and then it shifts 6 million copies, what the hell were you expecting from this thing? And is that determined more about, the money they've spent on marketing budgets, the budget of the game itself, and they're looking to, set some absurd sales metric that they have to hit in order to recoup those costs because they're inflated, poorly managed, and all those things we've talked about before. Look at Concord, most classic example, given the amount of time and money spent on that thing. Pulled the plug within 2 weeks of it launching.
Yeah, I think I saw they confirmed it has had 1.5 million players.
Mm-hmm.
It was a couple of weeks ago. Hard to know if that's. I mean, you would say if that was the final figure, that's not good enough, but it's still got to drop into EA Access or EA Play or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dragon's Dogma 2, which is probably the closest comparison that we had, recently. I think was at 3 million or 3.5 million. But you would have thought Dragon Age would do better than Dragon's Dogma, just as a more, recognized IP. But
whereas Dragon's Dogma, I think I would need to be fact checked on this, but the sentiment I was picking up was that I think it reviewed better Dragon's Dogma 2 than Dragon Age. Just slightly, it might have just pipped it. So whether that had enough to move the needle, don't know. But it just smacks of that sort of publisher snowblindness where they chase a trend and they just want to, follow what the top 10 most played games seem to suggest as being successful, which is live service or free-to-play games. I just don't think it would fit something like Dragon Age, and I think the existing fan base would revolt.
Yeah. And we talked about, because another part of the news was that they've scaled their studio down. I think the writing staff from Dragon Age has left basically, and it's now under 100 people apparently at BioWare, kind of in preparation for the next Mass Effect game, which in my opinion is a good thing, because especially for a game without multiplayer, I think you can have a relative. I mean, it doesn't sound lean, but 100 people in this day and age for a AAA game is quite small
and unusual too, given how much those development budgets have bloated.
Yeah, and it means their expectations for Mass Effect can be lower because it's a cheaper game for them to make. Maybe they make it slightly less ambitious, because I think most Mass Effect fans would just be happy with like a return to form that's a bit scaled back even, but focuses on the story and getting the basics right. Similar to what we'll come to later with Battlefield, but what you don't want is like, this is the most ambitious Mass Effect game ever. We're introducing loads of new features. It's completely open world and you can fly between planets and stuff. I mean, that might be the route they go down, but personally, I prefer them just to focus on getting the, series iconic moments that have been in the previous games and everyone's loved. Just get those right. And for this one, that you have to knock out the park, just focus on the stuff you're good at.
Well, otherwise your IP in that studio is going to be under threat, aren't they? Like they're going to
absolutely
come back from that.
Yeah. And again, the same with Battlefield. You can't have two disastrous games in a row in a series like that. Really, that's best case the series would just go dormant then for a long while, and maybe we'd get it back with a reboot in the future.
And if you're lucky, the IP survives but gets shopped around elsewhere within their network of studios, which, again, how much of that identity still exists? You might as well then just create a new IP at that point. It's a tricky one. I think you're right with Mass Effect. I think the notion of it being something that just hits the right notes in terms of characters and setting, like set it back in the original galaxy, let us meet the characters again, make it a sequel to 3, put it back in that world that players are invested in. If you could somehow tie that in with the Legendary Edition, that collection of 3 games where you could perhaps even import your save, I think would be a really great way to hook in players and keep them invested in a way. And that, I think, would encourage retention in a way that shoehorning live service, like they're talking about, they didn't do with Dragon Age. I think that would be, a much preferred approach for them to take, where there's actual investment in the story and choices you've made that continues on. That would just be, and when you've got a scaled back team like that and you're not shooting for multiplayer, that's the way to handle that. That's the way to do it, I think. And that makes sense. Again, just look at the response to Inquisition and how that game hasn't particularly aged well with time. The sentiment for that game seems to have shifted the other way, and it's quite negative. Veilguard, I think, got the basics right. They got the combat right. The characters were well written, for the most part. Some of the themes of the game weren't well written necessarily. There was some slightly wonky dialogue, certainly, but the characters were well designed in a way that Mass Effect Andromeda's characters were very poorly realised. These characters in Veilguard are distinct. They're interesting. I like spending time with my companions, which is often my metric for success in an RPG, is do I actually like not only being in the world and exploring it, but hanging out with the characters that are talking all the time. I've got to have that connection to them to care. So having perhaps a scaled back team for something like Mass Effect, if they are going to look at doing a Dragon Age follow-up, or Mass Effect becomes this kind of slightly less bloated, feature-rich experience, that could actually end up being serving them really well. It could end up being a good thing.
Yeah, and I feel like before, I mean, someone will maybe have to correct me, but that they've worked on Mass Effect and Dragon Age at the same time, because they've often come out quite close together. So I wonder if maybe because of how Dragon Age has performed, they're just focusing on Mass Effect now, rather than maybe if it had done really well, they'd keep a load of people on and they'd start working on the next Dragon Age game. But with 100 people, there's no way you can do too much on 2 AAA games probably. But I'd like to think they've had people there working on Mass Effect for a while, so hopefully at least the story is fleshed out and they've got a lot of that all written up, and it's just a case of implementing it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've kind of switching gears now to the latest round of Xbox third party, well, not third party, but Xbox sort of ports to other platforms that are going to PlayStation. We've now got confirmation that Forza, Age of Empires, and Age of Mythology, Age of Empires 2, by the way, I should specify, the definitive edition, and Age of Mythology are all going to be going to PlayStation at some point later this year. That road continues. Age of Empires on PlayStation, I think, is the biggest sort of shift away from what we've expected from them. And thoughts? What are we feeling about this?
Do you mean biggest shift from PlayStation or from Microsoft?
Oh, I was meaning, because I didn't believe that Age of Empires had ever popped up on PlayStation before. I could be mistaken.
Yeah, I think Age of Empires 2 was on PS2.
Oh, it was a
back in the
PS2
day.
release. Apologies. Nice
I
little
don't
live
think
fact
it was
check
on.
there.
Yeah, I don't think it was on Xbox even. But I remember because I was playing it on PC and I thought it's crazy that it's on PS2. I think maybe Command and Conquer was. I think there was potentially a
Command and Conquer
bit of
definitely was. I remember having that.
a spree of yeah, those games somehow
that were
working on PS2
that were ported around. Oh, hello.
But yeah, so that's that's the only. So Age of Empires for me is, I don't think many people, even like hardcore Xbox fans, will be shedding a tear, particularly for that one. But because it's got history, because it's a PC game more than an Xbox game. So you kind of feel privileged to have it on the console, Xbox, in the first place. So like Ara is on PC from. I don't know if we call that second party, but it's not on the console yet. So not too bothered about Age of Empires. But Forza was although we'd had the rumours for a while, it was still a bombshell when that news dropped, because
that's a core franchise.
We had the rumours
Halo Gears Forza
for over 12 months, and nothing had come up. So, and I think it will sell really well because there's a gap on PlayStation for that. Obviously, Gran Turismo's, I think, outperformed Forza Motorsport critically and probably commercially, but they haven't had like a Forza Horizon's much more arcadey, but it's still got the elements of simulation, and there's nothing, unless you want to play the crew, that's kind of filling that void, really. So I expect it will do very well and justify the decision to port it. I mean, the question was whether the next Forza will then be day and date, because the whole thing was, games that have appeared on other platforms will continue that going forward. And it's whether this is kind of, as well as being probably a smart business decision, whether it's like a way in now for Microsoft to start moving towards that day and date thing. And that's still the big thing that's up in the air. And I don't think anyone's asked Phil Spencer directly. He did loads of interviews last week or the week before, whether like day and date is coming, because when he's asked about his like Starfield going to PlayStation, he can always deflect it and say, I don't want to rule anything out, or no red lines. I expect if he said, will you be releasing games day one on PlayStation, he'd say there's no red lines again. But just curious to see if that's still off the table for non like third party IP or non-licensed games.
It's a relevant point. It's definitely a relevant point, because the notion that these games are going to then potentially be day and date across multiple platforms, across PlayStation, across PC and Xbox, that I do think then devalues Game Pass and their console ecosystem. I think the one thing that maintains them having their cake and eating it too from a revenue point of view is some predetermined exclusivity window for their releases that then is followed by, after X amount of time, a port to another platform. So I think that one, I don't know why you would then, I think you would really struggle to justify from a software point of view, from a revenue point of view, why you would then invest in the Xbox ecosystem if those games were day and date.
Yeah, because the typical strategy would be you give them a taste of Forza Horizon, and then the next Forza Horizon is exclusive to Game Pass for a year, and you get some people that even if the Xbox console is in not selling particularly well, you will get some people that move over, because you've got them hooked with the PlayStation version.
And probably,
for me,
they probably end up going PC Game Pass in that case.
Yeah,
that would be their happy medium.
And Phil said that, or I'm not sure it was Phil or Satcher in the earnings call, but PC Game Pass is the biggest growing
Mm.
Game Pass um, audience, which is probably not surprising because they're not selling any consoles. But um, yeah, it's interesting to see where they go with that. Um, Obviously, extra revenue for Microsoft selling it on PlayStation, but it's not as good as if they were selling it on PC or Xbox because they're not getting the full 100%
Not getting
revenue.
the full
So
fat, right? So
yeah,
yeah, it's. I think that's going to be like. Let's look at South of Midnight. Let's look at where that ends up. We know it's Xbox PC from the Xbox Developer Direct. It was not confirmed to be PlayStation yet. You imagine that port's coming. How long that spends exclusive to Xbox and PC is going to be very interesting to me. I still can't believe that Hellblade 2 has not been announced as a port yet. I don't know whether they have looked at it. Has it bombed so badly that they've gone, it is not worth the expense of porting this thing? Don't know.
I mean, it's been in the rumors, like adjacent to the rumors, hasn't it?
It's been around.
It's hard. I wonder if, like, if it was me, I was, is it Matt Booty now that's in charge of this type of thing? I would
Mm.
be looking at it and saying it didn't do well enough on Xbox. Port it to PlayStation, and if it sells well enough, then you can make a third one.
Mm.
But if it goes to PlayStation, where it was originally, kind of its home, and it does similarly badly, then
And that's a wrap on that IP, isn't it?
you're not getting a third
Yeah.
game.
And that's where,
Um,
I do think that there have been a couple of really poor decisions made with their studio closures and studios that have divested from the first party. The two most egregious were Tango Gameworks and uh oh shit, the developer behind Crash Bandicoot. Activision Studio. Toys for Bob. Toys for Bob. There you go. Brief senior moment there. But those two studios being lost from their ecosystem, if Hi-Fi Rush 2, published by Krafton, sells really well, and Toys for Bob, their new IP, which apparently is a partnership with Microsoft, which is really bizarre. What a strange contractual situation they've ended up being in. That would be odd, I think, if those games then managed to find success. You'd then look at that and go, why the hell did you let them go? You let that out of your first-party infrastructure. We will see, what that looks like. But I do think with the number, look how rapidly these ports have started to emerge. I feel like we went from they're not happening to multiple titles. Big profile titles have ended up jumping ship.
yeah, and I think people expected. I'm not sure if I think a state of play has either been announced or has been rumored now for February sometime. People were expecting these to be announced then, and people are expecting stuff to be announced at the Switch 2 Direct, which I think will probably happen. But it's interesting that these examples have just been like the Twitter account for the developers have just said it's coming to PlayStation. It's a lot more understated than Indiana Jones, and I think hopefully that's Microsoft learning like that was stupid. As much as it got headlines, it was headlines at the wrong time because it was supposed to be about Xbox. So I prefer this way of doing it. I prefer it just announce it on a significant date for the series or when the developers want to announce it. Don't, for the most part. Switch 2 is different because they need to announce their launch lineup, but I wouldn't be in favor of them announcing PlayStation dates at big events, really, for Xbox games. And having Xbox games like at a state of play, like where their headline game at a state of play is like Forza Horizon or something, that would just be not great from an optics point of view for me, anyway.
I wonder if that's bad optics, but for the other side too, like bad optics for PlayStation that they're relying on, they're what is now rapidly becoming one of the biggest third-party publishers on the planet, because they're releasing their games on their platform.
The more they do with this stuff, the less weird it will seem. Like when the PC day and date was announced, it was a bit of a shock, and then people got used to it pretty quickly. And I think the example is Doom. When it had PlayStation on the Doom trailer, everyone was just like, "Oh shit, it's coming to PlayStation," and they were like, "Oh yeah, but they did say that IP that had been on other platforms, so it's like fair enough."
Yeah,
but still, for me, like looking at Doom coming out, I think they could have held that back
Giving it an indie style 3-month window, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, give it something.
There's no multiplayer, so they can't talk about, player base being unbalanced because they've got earlier time with it. It's single player only. So, yeah, interesting. I maintain that South of Midnight is going to be a really good barometer for where Xbox are moving forward with the way they handle this. I think, let's look at the really high profile stuff. If that Gears collection turns out to be true, and the Gears collection's day and date across platforms, E-Day should be, I think, if you're Phil Spencer, you're holding that, you're keeping that 6 months, at least 6 months on Xbox.
Yeah, good. Gears collection is still a special case because it's old games,
Yeah.
even if they're remastered or whatever. Master Chief collection, I think, and Starfield seem to be the next ones that would, or we'll have the Switch ones, and I expect maybe they're holding Master Chief collection back for the Switch thing, but you'd have to say the Master Chief audience would be more on PlayStation than it is on Switch. So unless it's at the state of play, that would be pretty crazy.
Slightly world-shattering, but then maybe that's partly what Xbox are trying to do here. They've realised they're in third. They've then gone, right, well, what is the thing? We need to be disruptive. And I actually, bold Microsoft is way better than safe, everything is lovely and hunky-dory when it clearly isn't Microsoft. Like, I like them taking some swings. I think that's the kind of what you need, I think, in the games industry to drive competition and drive things forward, is that these publishers don't, placated Sony, resting on their laurels. Sony is a dangerous Sony. I like the PS4 era.
Yeah, was
a great period of time for them with their sort of very bullish marketing about the how to they absolutely eviscerated Xbox and on their messaging about trading games and online check-ins and all that stuff around the Xbox One. And then PS5, I think, has been very iterative sequels. They've had to rethink their whole live service approach. Like, there's been a huge number of projects either binned off or repurposed. So I like competition in this space. It makes it interesting.
As much as Microsoft getting more revenue for their gaming division is competition, it's also in a way less competition because they're giving the games, like, if you're PlayStation, what's the problem here? Is there a problem? Because you're just getting Xbox. It's unlikely you would see people leaving PlayStation other than to try some of these games for free on Game Pass, like on PC.
Or if something like Fable reviews well enough that it is a quote-unquote, when I say system seller, I'm probably referring more to Game Pass than anything else. It's almost like a system in itself. You're buying into that ecosystem because you know that Fable's not going to come out until summer 26 on PlayStation.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the bet, I guess. And I look at South of Midnight not as a system seller, but as an interesting diversion. It's another... I'm very excited for it, but I'm under no illusions that that's going to suddenly generate a huge number of Game Pass subscribers. But if it reviews well enough, you get those people dipping in on PC, perhaps, hold it back before you port it, and there we go.
And as much as Phil Spencer talks about this is the way the industry's going, and I think a lot of people, not even people critical of PlayStation, but people that are PlayStation fans, are saying they could see PlayStation going down this route. There's nothing to say that in the future, or maybe when Phil Spencer retires, or when Satya Nadella is replaced at some point, if Xbox are in a stronger position, say Game Pass is like double the number of subscribers that it has now, that they don't start holding games back again from PlayStation. Because the reason they've done this is because, like you said, because they're in third place. If they weren't in third place, if they're in second place or first, especially for like active users, I don't see what the advantage. It will get to a position where it's actually, it gives them a real competitive advantage to start holding stuff back again. But they don't. They're not there at the moment. So we talked about day and date is the real issue. If they start putting everything day and date on PlayStation, and we talked about this offline, like, imagine the console launch. You have two consoles launching at the same time, and the PlayStation's got all the Xbox games in their launch lineup.
Yeah, if you have an Xbox and a PlayStation launching within months of each other, but they both have the new Halo. PlayStation's won.
Can't imagine.
Yeah.
Unless we're literally in a situation where the Xbox is a PC, which maybe we will be. But yeah, it'd be. I would prefer Xbox treat PlayStation the way PlayStation treat PC, and it's still case by case. And there's generally a big exclusivity window, and occasionally you get stuff that goes on day one, but it's rare.
Yeah, and they have to look as well at, I suppose, at like what is ultimately going to generate the revenue for them that's going to recoup that investment, particularly in Activision Blizzard. That would seem to be publishing these games on other platforms, but don't shoot yourselves in the foot, please, Xbox. Like that's, I think, the great challenge they face is that they end up devaluing their own first-party output by, and therefore by extension, devaluing their own subscription service by simply spreading their wings too far. And that's what hopefully they are aware of. And this next 12 months is the most interested I've been in the machinations and the business side of these companies than I have been in a long time. Sony's pivot away from live service is going to be studied like for history. Like this is fascinating time for them.
Yeah, and I think Microsoft have a bit of a problem, or a bit of a failing, that they don't publish their Game Pass numbers, and they don't publish many of their actual figures at all. It's all very, the highest number of active users as we've ever had, or it's all like vague. Whereas I saw like Disney publish their subscriber numbers today, and they literally say the number of people that are subscribed to Disney Plus, and the number of people that have left, and the number of that means that people can then, analysts and people can say, oh, what's going on here? Why aren't these people paying for Disney anymore? But you can't. No one can criticize Xbox because we just don't know this. When you criticize them, people just say you're a fanboy because you don't know. Or if you say Game Pass is unsustainable, we don't know if it's unsustainable because they don't tell us.
Because they don't tell us what those numbers look like. Yeah,
it's good to get criticism from like people in the industry about how you're doing, and if you don't publish numbers, and also again, obviously investors and things.
But that breeds invention, doesn't it? It forces them to get creative and to improve because they're being held to account by their own metrics. So it's a tricky one, I think. And this next few months, this next 6 months leading up to Summer Game Fest is going to be very interesting. Just how these things are marketed, how explicit the conversations are,
and so the Summer Game Fest, whether that is because at some point you think we might get like a barrage of trailers that are Xbox trailers that start having PlayStation in them, because they was at the developer direct, they
showed it. Yeah, everything apart from South of Midnight trailers was PlayStation as well. Yeah. So
which is kind of a new. I feel like that's kind of a new thing.
It is. They would always, even if they announce it in a press release afterwards or an Xbox Wire post, the actual trailer itself would just be Xbox branded. That was it. I look at something like Gears E-Day, which I think everyone, from what I say everyone's such a broad term, but like certainly for us, certainly the sort of wider conversation online was that a game like that, being a prequel, being more survival horror-esque, going darker, and it maintaining its co-op focus, I think was absolutely the right thing for them to do for that series. That would be a draw for people if they've played a Gears collection day and date, but they want to get E-Day day one with it, and that's going to be multiplayer as well. That's going to be the real test, because now, unlike Doom, unlike South of Midnight, Gears is multiplayer, which they haven't ever done a Halo so far, with like Halo Infinite, where it was released piecemeal and poorly spaced out and clearly not ready to drop. They are feature-wrapped games. Like, they are complete packages between campaign, horde mode, multiplayer. There is a lot going on in terms of the value of those packages. And if you want to get people, if PC is where the growth is, Gears has a big PC community. If you want to get people, jumping on your PC Game Pass sub, keep Gears of War E-Day on there for a year before you put it on PlayStation. 6 months even. I think 6 months at the absolute bare minimum for that to have an impact. Because that is a long time, actually. I feel like, actually, even though indie on paper was 3 months, it feels like ages ago that game was out. It had its moment, and then it's kind of
dropped out of the most played lists already. So I think I this is not on the list to talk about, but I don't think indie's, considering how well it's reviewed, I don't think it will have quite maybe met their
Hmm.
expectations. Maybe from when they commissioned it, I think it might have met expectations, but probably not from like play test. And they said this is shaping up to be really good, and they saw the reviews coming in, which were really strong. Um, it's kind of dropped
Yeah.
out of focus now for a few like February games that are coming up.
Well, we mentioned as well the state of Gears of War E-Day and what perhaps Microsoft's plans will be for the future, how it's going to be released, and where what kind of exclusivity window and/or day and date that we can expect from that. We had news recently confirming that Bulletstorm developers People Can Fly are officially a co-developer on the game, joining the likes of Crystal Dynamics and with the initiative on Perfect Dark. This is standard practice now in the industry, not only across those big publishers like Ubisoft that have their various teams all feeding in, but we've seen time and again studios pitching in on AAA releases to, well, Battlefield titles. We'll get to it in our deep dive, but they had 4 studios work on the previous Battlefield game across its various different modes. People Can Fly give me a huge confidence in E-Day. That was actually a really cool announcement for me, because the Coalition, I think, are one of Xbox's strongest studios from a technical perspective, from a storytelling perspective. They are sort of as close to the top end of PlayStation first party, like Naughty Dog, like Guerrilla, that I think Xbox has. A studio that they in fact set up themselves. It's one of the few that they've organically grown and has produced some really, really strong titles for Xbox. People Can Fly have been co-developing and working on aspects of Gears of War, whether it was Judgment, the Ultimate Edition of the first game when it was re-released. They have a history of working on those titles, and given how I have a bit of a soft spot for Bulletstorm, I had a good time playing that game. I remember that when it first came out on PS3. I think they are well positioned to support that studio and deliver that title. So just a logical partnership. I was so chuffed to see that they were working on that.
Yeah, I think it went down really well, and it's also just nice to know that they're getting the support they need
Yeah.
to hopefully make an amazing Gears game, which is what everyone needs. I was just thinking actually, with say a Gears collection comes out on PlayStation, you put those little banners in that you get. It's like saying there's a new Gears of War out exclusively on like Xbox and PC or something. They can put
Yeah.
what they like in their
Of
own
course.
like
Yeah. Put
on
that
their
as
own
as
banners
your
in the
daily
game.
message. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that is gonna drive some clicks on particularly on PC. I'm telling you, lock it in.
yeah.
Um, we also had recently a lot of conversations around pricing, particularly for things like GTA 6 and whether that's going to increase what publishers believe they can then charge for other titles, that they end up setting a precedent for 80, 90, perhaps even $100 games. I had a fantastic conversation about this with the Gaming Arcadia crew on the Gaming Arcadia Roundtable. Shout out to Acer and Darge for having me on there. That was a lovely experience for me to jump onto their show, and felt very welcome by them, which was really cool. The discussion we had there, and something I wanted to put to you was, do you think, as a standard edition for a game like that, 80 buckaroonies is an acceptable price point?
Yeah, I think it is.
Is that relative to the size of the title / development budget and pedigree? Is the IP affecting that opinion as well?
I would say quality
Mm-hmm.
and more than size. Size to an extent, but
It's
like it's
relative,
not
isn't it, as
hundreds
well?
of hours necessarily. Plus, you get the multiplayer, which is some people are all in on the multiplayer,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it is more of a compared to like Call of Duty, where I think you get some people that literally just play the multiplayer. I think everyone that plays the multiplayer in GTA will have also played the single player, so it's a bit more. I think it would be hard to argue that that isn't still good value. Um, I mean, I think what you were talking about on Gaming Arcadia, whether it sets a precedent and you get other companies trying to push their prices up. I think for certain games like Call of Duty, where you do have a big campaign and you have a big multiplayer mode that's well supported, and if it's a good quality release, you could see them trying to push that up. It's whether you get other publishers like EA trying to take the piss with FIFA, or what was formerly known as FIFA, when it's a yearly release, but they know everyone wants to buy it, so
Mm-hmm.
they try and push that up. You always get people like Square Enix trying to do stupid things from that perspective. But there's a select few games, probably Bethesda game. If you had a good Elder Scrolls game or a good Fallout game, can probably justify it. But there aren't many, I
Mm.
don't think. But
I
GTA is for me is one.
it's it's becoming a tougher pill to swallow for me. I think upon reflection on it, I'm struggling with the notion of an £80 release that's outside of. As a man that's surrounded by special editions who spent significantly more on single titles, I'm aware of perhaps slight hypocrisy there. But just looking purely at a standard edition of a title, I think it's a big ask. I think it's an enormous amount of money for one title. So I think I've seen that pricing seem to creep up. Well, this is the first generation of consoles I can remember that the console hardware's actually increased in price. Both major platforms have become more expensive. So it's whether this is just a reality of these ballooning costs. They have to recoup that investment. You can imagine, a lot of money's been pumped into this thing.
But they will. They're guaranteed going to recoup it anyway, aren't they? They'd recoup it at £10 a copy. It's just going to sell so much. It's about getting the sweet spot. Like I used to do. My job used to be trying to set like ticket prices for a tourist attraction. Like you try and pick what you think people are going to pay before you get to the point where so many people are saying that's too much. You've got to get the balance exact. Try and pitch it exactly right, and that's what they need to do. There's some things that they could do, like say if you spent £80 on it, then you would get the next gen. They could say we'll upgrade it for free next gen. There won't be a next gen version. It will be you buy it now for 80 and you get the next one.
Do they bundle in some premium currency maybe for the online when it launches? Doesn't always go day and date with the single player dropping, but there's something they could do there, isn't there? To try and mitigate that.
They could separate the single and multiplayer, which often the multiplayer launches separately.
Yes.
But they could release the single player for 50 quid, the multiplayer for 20 quid or something. Because GTA Online has such a big audience. I'm not in favor of any of these options, but just there are a few ways they could go about doing it. But the price stuff is also kind of arbitrary because for me anyway, because there aren't many games I buy at launch. That would probably be one of them. But we talk about this a lot, and I'm sorry for going on about it all the time, but if I want to buy most Nintendo games, I'm paying a premium well above what I would pay for Xbox games. Day one releases on Xbox, loads of them are under like 50 quid.
Yeah.
They're pricing them so sensibly. But Nintendo just won't do that, even for like cash grab Nintendo IP stuff that they're just cloning. Not being too harsh, but stuff they're just releasing.
Cloning!
You know what I mean.
I do.
GTA released at 80, and I'm sure it would stay at 80 for a long time. Nintendo released games at whatever 50 or 60, and they stay at 60 for the life of the game, basically. Microsoft released games at 60, and they dropped to 30 in 6 months.
PlayStation's the same. Kind of greatest hits collection. We see them they're making those adjustments all the time.
So yeah, it's as much as you will get people that pay this stuff, pay the prices at day one. If it's priced too high, the price will drop.
Yeah,
so
and actually,
it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, one can argue there that you price it a bit higher, you've got somewhere to drop it to, right? You've got a place to go.
Yeah, you don't want to start low, because you can't put the price up
and then
unless
you're
making
stuffed.
consoles.
Yeah, which I still can't wrap my brain around how that panned out. But yeah, I think you put it at that level, you've got then an opportunity to then have, say, a re-released version that bundles in some DLC that's like a slightly discounted price. There's then a sales plan for that. There's a structure to it that they can then follow that gives them flexibility in their pricing choices. I
would prefer them to, because we didn't get any single player DLC for the last GTA. I would prefer them to do that, have a base price that we expect at 60, instead of focusing all on GTA Online. Have some campaign DLC that you release, and also we were talking about live service, Mass Effect or live service Dragon Age. They need to stop using, I think, live service, because it's getting to where we have with NFC, like NFC's starting to piss people off just when they hear live service. You need to something like Dragon Age. You just want DLC. You want if you want to monetize it like they're talking about, you just need DLC that's there at launch, that's probably more cosmetic, but that people can buy. And then you need stuff like after a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, if you really want to kind of keep people engaged and get extra revenue from it. I don't think you need to have it feel like it's a like free to play game or anything. It can, and that is for me how I would prefer them to do GTA. Just release it at the standard price and sell people some stuff if they want to. Obviously, the GTA Online is going to be heavily monetized, but try and monetize the campaign a bit with DLC this time around. I don't know why they didn't do it last time.
Seems like a real missed opportunity, given that GTA 4 had some really good expansions to it. So it's
Did Red Dead have any? The last Red Dead?
no.
Do you know?
Online was released actually.
Yeah.
Online was released as a standalone product as well, and that had sort of some quite significant updates to it. Not seasonal in the traditional sense, but they had some big updates to that. But there was nothing akin to, say, Red Dead's Undead Nightmare, the original sort of like that zombie expansion. There's nothing like that at all.
It's interesting because my wife played through Red Dead and finished it, and I was like, oh, that's a shame. And I was like, well, you could try the online because it's quite story driven.
It is,
if you like the single player. So I wonder if that's kind of the reason why they didn't do DLC is like if you want more, play the online.
Online is
and then they get you into the monetized,
which they are actively monetizing with that in-game currency.
Yeah.
Buying gold, I think, was the approach they took in Red Dead Online.
And it was good. Like it did feel like single, like co-op campaign, didn't it? When we played it together, it was just a bit too multiplayer.
Yes.
Like I would have preferred it was like a closed.
Yeah, no,
system,
absolutely.
kind
Like,
of,
that's always been our preference with things like that. Just let us, let us be running around the world. We're good, Hello, you little squizzler. That's me talking to Pumpkin, not to you, the audience. So final headline here to discuss tonight is rumours of a evolving direction for Apex Legends. There was talk of sort of a more fully fledged follow-up doing the rounds, and now recently Andrew Wilson, CEO of EA Games, has been talking up the idea that actually a lot of those plans for a potential theoretical Apex sequel are actually going to now just be presented as a much more substantial update to the original. I think that's a much smarter play. I think an Apex Legends 2 would go and follow the same path as an Overwatch 2, which never quite captured the market share and reach of the original. It's why I think, for the same reason why a Rocket League 2 would be pointless. Just update the original game, keep that thing relevant, bring new people in because you've made such a substantial leap forward compared to where the game previously was. Something like Apex as well. I think just the idea where they noticed that, quote unquote, yeah, again, that classic underperforming phrase. Let's also acknowledge that this game has been out for years. These games do have a shelf life to them and should have a shelf life to them. Not everything is going to become ubiquitous like Fortnite and Roblox and Minecraft. And it's the chase to be the next one of those that often leads to those stupid decisions.
I think this is what... So previously, I think he'd said that the second version of all these live service games generally underperform compared to the previous one, and it starts to be divisive. You kind of split the community if you keep the old one running. If you don't keep the old one running, people are pissed because you force them into like a version that they don't like in some cases. And now, like you said, they're talking about instead of that, they would do a significant update of some sort, which makes a lot of sense. I think potentially they're concerned that, say, when Battlefield comes out, whether they start to cannibalize. Obviously, they're completely different games, but the only way they can follow Apex Legends, for me, is to release quite a substantially different game that allows Apex Legends to carry on running. So you maybe take some of the community away from Apex Legends, but you still support Apex Legends.
And also and
you try and draw new people in from like COD or Battlefield or something,
while preserving your legacy audience with the previous title, which is where I was kind of always disappointed that Warzone disappeared. The first version of Warzone, that got updated and that changed to what it is now. That I wish that had been preserved. If you're going to make a sequel, I think keep that thing around.
Especially when there's so many people playing those games. you can easily have like a classic experience with loads of people playing, and you have a newer experience with why do they have to? We can only
Fortnite,
have one map live at a time
yeah,
and stuff.
Fortnite did it right. They have an OG map mode, which is just the
Yeah,
original
there's so
season.
much going on in Fortnite. Yeah, it's
Yeah, but
crazy.
also the no build mode was the thing that got me back into it. I played it again because they removed the building from it. It was great, and they've got an OG map no build variant in there as well with a playlist that you know they've got so many versions of that game within their single launcher. That's the way to do it. That then you're catering to every segment of your audience.
It's pretty cool. It's like on PC when you have server browsers and people have got
Mm.
their own crazy servers running, but they've just got them like by default in the game, which is it's really
It's
cool.
really, really cool. Sticking with sort of our take on current games and sort of where they're heading, one of our community questions last week, unfortunately we had to postpone the show, but one of the community questions we asked was just off the back of the Xbox Developer Direct, what are people most excited for? And looking through our Discord right now, H, Damon Hunter, Jessica, Big Manny, all of them saying Doom. Doom was unanimous in our response to that. That is the thing people are most anticipating. Demon Hunter, welcome by the way, Demon Hunter. Shout out to you, pal, from the Gaming Arcadia community. Thank you so much for joining us. He said, I was surprised today colleagues at work that never talked about video games were talking about Doom the Dark Ages. So I think that has definitely cut through into the mainstream, certainly in his cited example. Anecdotal there, of course, but seems to be there's some real excitement around that. Big Manny keeping it nice and succinct. Doom all day. That was the response with a jolly gift shared as well. That definitely was the highlight. We all know mine was South of Midnight. I've waxed lyrical about that enough now on System Link, but Doom certainly has been the thing that people have connected with. Was that your highlight too? What was your sort of most exciting take from that?
Yeah. Doom looks really cool. South of Midnight, I am all in on the story, but I'm not quite sold on the combat. So Ninja Gaiden,
to be determined.
Don't know. I need to get that in my hands, which I'll be able to because it's on Game Pass. And Expedition 33, I really like the story. I think the concept is really, really cool. I loved the combat system where like the camera's really cinematic and stuff. It reminded me a lot of Metaphor and I guess like Persona. Everyone's talking about how good the graphics are.
I'm not sold on that one myself.
There's like weird depth of field, kind of very blurry kind of backgrounds, which I'm not generally a big fan of. But the story's really cool. So
yeah,
it was a great show, and I'm really looking forward to Doom.
Yeah, absolutely. Just circling back to our previous point there, Big Manny mentioned about in relation to Fortnite, no build is the best game mode in the game. It got me into it, so that's interesting too.
Cool.
That was the thing that kept you invested.
I hate building. It used to piss me off every time.
The worst you'd get the drop on someone and then just sniper tower, and I want to be able to get into an actual fight with you. Please, and use the destruction. Those environments have really good destructible environments in that game. So you want that to be the focus, I think, instead of just these elaborate build battles that just look like a Rubik's cube gone wrong, and I just can't do it. My old brain can't handle it. So, Mike, I've been looking forward to this. We say sometimes, you've probably heard us say this at some point on the podcast. We've gone save it. We say it in the Discord as well sometimes because we know there's stuff we want to talk about and we have to save it for the show. Battlefield 6 has revealed itself. We've seen now more than just concept art or a logo, right? We now know...
There's some things...
Yeah.
There's some things we talk about quite passionately. For me, it's Nintendo pricing and being arseholes. We talk about Xbox Game Pass strategy and things like that quite passionately. And I think Battlefield is probably the other one that we could talk about for hours, but we haven't had reason to since we've been doing the show, really. No. Because obviously the last Battlefield was a bit wet. It's been redeemed somewhat since, but it feels good to have new Battlefield news. And I think for me the biggest shock was that they think it will be out before April 26th, which is probably sooner than we would have anticipated.
We could be looking at an end of this year potentially for that, and or
like
some kind of beta. Yeah. Some kind of beta to end the year, and then it becomes like a February and March release next year. But I certainly think we are going to be able to play Battlefield 6 this year in some form. I think I'd like to lock that in. think they have a finals problem. For me personally, we play the finals a lot. That is the hands down one of the best feeling shooters that I've ever played, and the destruction is incomparable compared to anything else. Now, those little snippets of gameplay that we saw this week seemed to suggest a very malleable and very destructive environment again. Showing it being an urban environment and not just a shipping yard with a bunch of containers was a huge win for me. We've complained at length about how the destruction and identity that defined Battlefield, particularly in the Bad Company era, has been steadily stripped away and scaled back over the last few titles, despite the, very trailer heavy usage of things like Levolution and those sort of buzzwords. It has certainly in 2042, it's almost, throwaway in terms of its implementation in there. There is so much of that game that just feels like Call of Duty, but worse feeling.
You have to assume that things are not destructible in that game.
Yes.
And then when they are, it's like, oh, that's helpful.
Yes.
But that's not. They've been slowly moving Battlefield to be closer to Call of Duty, which is they should have been sticking to their strengths, as we said earlier in the show. But also they tried to move it towards more live service kind of, or like free to play style elements in it, which at launch, which they backtracked on for the most part eventually. So we just have to hope. I'm relatively confident they'll have learnt most of their lessons from that. But time after time, the thing, if we were doing the show 5 years ago, the thing they do in every single Battlefield game is they launch it and it's shit.
Yeah.
And then they spend 5 years making it good. And it gets to a point where it's really good. And then they release their next Battlefield game, which is shit. And they spend 5 years making it good. And it's just, we played.
We didn't anticipate the server demand. And we played Battlefield 5, discovered it later, right? Like we did not play that at launch. I remember playing 1 at launch and didn't like it. Went to 5 well after launch as a result of my bad experience with 1, but it was 3 years in. It'd been heavily patched, and we had a great time with it. So they've got to come out the gate. I mean, Battlefield has Halo Infinite energy for me in the last couple titles, where it's launched poorly, feature incomplete, not ticking the boxes that you need to make that game be memorable and define it within that franchise. It's, the destruction, the scale, the well-designed maps, the feel of the combat. It is underwhelmed multiple times, and I am surprised that we are getting. In some ways, I am actually surprised and pleased that it is being treated like a mainline title, Battlefield 6. Now, that's not actually its confirmed name; it's kind of what it's being referred to as. But it seems to be that it's not being treated like a spin-off.
There's 4 studios again confirmed developing it,
and they're bringing back Portal as well. The classic mode. Probably
I forget the name
one
of the studio that worked on that, but presumably they'll be back.
Not sure.
They did a really good job on it.
Yeah.
It's like the only good thing about
the one redeeming feature from 2042, right? That they had the Bad Company 2 maps in there, and it's on paper. I believe you've got. I want to say someone possibly from Respawn might be heading up creative direction on that now.
That's Vince, isn't it?
Is it Vince Impala that's heading that up? That gives me hope. He's launched some good titles, Titanfall being the absolute pinnacle.
Yeah, it hasn't launched many bad titles.
No, Respawn got a hell of a pedigree, in terms of that, if that studio's helping out.
I think at least he will know what the first-person shooter audience wants. Even if it's a case of they're trying to take people away from Call of Duty. Like, at least it should be a good game that does that. Even if they're maybe I don't want them to sacrifice like what Battlefield's best at, but even if they do that because they're trying to capture a different audience, at least it should be good and well implemented, which isn't what you would have said about the last couple of Battlefield games when they launched. What I would like, similar to Mass Effect, is I would like them to do a stripped down version instead of saying this is going to be the best Battlefield ever. Just like similar to what they did with Battlefield Portal, this should be a love letter to Battlefield fans. It shouldn't be a, whatever. We'll know from the first trailer kind of the direction they're going in, and I suspect they will be going big with it. Which for me, I'm not sure about, because it seems risky, and I think it's easier to do something small really well than it is to do like a really massive.
I agree. I think there's, if anything, I feel like Battlefield 3 would be a good template for them. to look at, because actually when you look at that game, not 4 was the Levolution gimmick. 3 felt the closest in terms of like to ambition and appropriate scale, which Bad Company 2 had managed to deliver. 3 felt like a really nice, almost like iterative step. It wasn't sort of, they didn't try and scale up too big. I think that was 4's mistake. It was too bloated. 1, for me, the balance was all over the place, and then 5 took a long time to become stable. So that you can track back, I think, to, aside from Bad Company, which I think is the best version of Battlefield I've ever played. Even though I love 1943, I think objectively the best game is Bad Company's 1 and 2. 3, I think, is the closest match to what perhaps 1942 was on PC. That original vision of what Battlefield should be. That, I feel like, should be their template. And since they're already putting so much emphasis on announcing Portal now, hello Pumpkin, that to me feels like they are aware of its legacy, perhaps under the direction of Vince, knowing what Battlefield fans want, a game that's hopefully scaled appropriately in a way that's not going to be too unnecessarily bloated.
Yeah, it's weird, because I feel like Battlefield 5, when we played it, felt like Bad Company 2.
Yes.
For me, like you say, the pinnacle is Bad Company 2, and I would aim to have every game feel like that. But I think that there's certain subsets of the PC audience who don't like Bad Company 2.
No.
So it is a bit difficult, and probably like hardcore Battlefield fans from the old days don't like Bad Company. So it's,
and probably
like
a
console
3
game
as a result. They like
3.
3.
So it's, you have to kind of get the balance right. But I do think probably that core audience do like the state Battlefield 5 was in as well. So for me, 5 was a really good, where it finished was a good in a good state. And I it's kind of unusual territory for them, because although I think Battlefield 1 was a bit of a reboot, this is going to, you would imagine, is going to be a complete departure from 2042. Although probably the shooting, how it feels, will be similar, but everything else you would hope is going to be completely stripped out, and they'll be starting again. My problem with Battlefield is, like I said, has been they've got it in a good state, but then they feel that they have to reinvent it for the next game, and they don't do that with Call of Duty. Call of Duty, the next game feels like the last game. You have a different developer, and it's, they had a few extra bits and pieces in, but you can pick up the multiplayer in any Call of Duty, and if you're good at Call of Duty, you'll be good at the multiplayer. But Battlefield, that's not the case at all. 2042, like, I was just shit at it, because they changed the mechanics, they changed how it felt, they changed the destruction.
And the map design was also so open. There was so little cover, and it was just, it was really poorly designed. And I think that going back to basics, doing what hopefully Mass Effect is going to do, there is nothing wrong with that at all. And they need a win. They need something that's going to preserve that IP, because it doesn't have a particularly positive legacy right now. And they've squandered a lot of goodwill.
Yeah, I felt that they had, for a long time, they've their idea of a good level was one with a bottleneck in the middle. So it was really memorable, and everyone's like, oh, it's that level where there's like a meat grinder in the middle where everyone dies, and it's just like, that isn't good level design. It's about making memorable maps that are balanced, and you can take different routes through the map and stuff. Maybe you can have a bit of a bottleneck somewhere, but not like the Metro level or whatever, where it's just carnage.
Bad Company 2 had innumerable maps that were exactly that. Multiple routes, bases that were memorable to defend, conquest. They were built for conquest, the thing that makes Battlefield what it is. And I do place a lot of emphasis on the destruction. I look at Battlefield, and my memories of Bad Company 2 are collapsing buildings, taking down snipers, blowing out rooftops with that giant explosion animation. That I have such vivid memories of playing that when steadily I've seen that very unique feature be scaled back further and further, that always disappointed me every time.
I would so much prefer it looked like a last gen game, but the destruction was complete.
Yes,
because Call of Duty doesn't look great in multiplayer. It's not amazing graphics. I feel like they could definitely implement Call of Duty level multiplayer graphics with pretty much full destruction. But they're always trying to do these incredible trailers where it looks like a movie and stuff, because there's all the. I get that is part of what makes Battlefield great, having those moments that you don't get in Call of Duty, where where there's helicopters like destroying buildings and stuff. But it doesn't have to be quite so polished, like graphically. Just focus on getting the destruction right.
Absolutely, because that's the thing that's going to differentiate you. Right, and when you've got something like the finals, which is kind of trucking along, it's got a steady audience and has proven that the tech has evolved. I would imagine Battlefield's still using Frostbite, and it's not.
Yeah,
they've not switched to Unreal. Unreal Engine 5 has inbuilt destruction capabilities. It's one of the defining features of that engine. And you look at the finals as a very next-gen looking game. They preserve the graphics, resolution, frame rate, and destruction. I just don't feel like. I'm in a tough one with Battlefield, actually, because I hear you on the scale. I think, actually, though, I don't know if I just want the same again. Do something where, like, the destruction is really, really strong. The player count is upped, even if the map designs are kept nice and tight. I do want something from it that's a bit more, we couldn't do this before and now we can, from Battlefield. I would like that from them, even if the overall scale of the game is still focused.
My concern is that they think that means big maps with big player counts, and I think that's the problem that they had with 2042.
Let's get it down. Because Battlefield 2042 maps are empty.
That is the thing that they will be able to do, like with Mario Kart. They'll be able to increase the player count on consoles and increase the map size, potentially even with destruction. I'm all in favor of having a mode that supports that, or certain, you put a filter on and you can play the huge maps.
Give me an option.
Like Battlefield 5.
Yeah.
But, Bad Company 2, maybe it had the option, but I don't feel like it did. You just went in, and if it was a small map, it was still great. Yeah. If it was a big map, it was still great. You could, we always used to say, like, as engineer class, which we generally used to play.
Always.
It didn't matter if it was a small map. You were competitive. If it was a massive map and everyone was in helicopters, you could just bunker down, and you still had a great time.
Yeah. Well, you just mentioned something there that they got so wrong in 2042 was the classes. They removed the class system, and then obviously that was patched later, and that just fundamentally is what Battlefield is. Get the DNA right, and then we can talk about whatever wacky feature you want to throw in on top to justify your sequel.
It's hard because it's been, since the days of Bad Company 2, a lot has changed in FPSs. You've got the extensive customized character customization that you didn't have. All the classes look the same. Back then, you've got the emotes and things that you have to work in that are probably quite challenging to work in without pissing people off who want like a military shooter. And for me in 2042, they were annoying. All that stuff was in my face. I didn't want it. I just wanted to play the game. Also, just I noticed that the sign up for the playtest website was they underestimated the capacity required for that, which is a bad.
I can't handle their press release when it comes out. We didn't anticipate the demand. How many games do you need to have to verify that?
They over anticipate the demand for all of their games, EA, except for Battlefield, where they massively
always overperforms. Right? It's just nonsense. Well, hopefully we'll have more to share on that in the weeks ahead. They seem to have been really opening up the doors on it over the last couple of days.
We need to get in a playtest, don't we?
We do.
Get on there somehow. I need to check that website.
Get into that, please. Well, folks, that will wrap it up for this week's episode of System Link. Thank you, Mike, as always, for joining us, and for everyone in chat. Take care, folks. Thank you for weighing in this evening. We'll be back this Saturday with Burly Bird Live, and we'll put up our voting poll in our Discord, which you can find at Burly Bird Media. You can also follow us on Threads, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube at Burly Bird Media as well. Mike, my lovely co-host, where can people find you?
Mainly on the xboxguide.com. I'm doing a review of January Game Pass stuff, which should be going live in the next couple of days. Otherwise, on Blue Sky or Threads.
Fantastic. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
See ya.